The best part about growing up in rural Zimbabwe in the 1980s is that I had no idea at all that we were poor. See, these were the days before Facebook, YouTube, MTV Cribs, Kardashians, and selfies. Our dreams and imaginations seemed to be bounded by the big mountains that surrounded our village. We did not know what we did not have. Along with my good friends Wilfred and Thomas, we would spend most of the afternoons playing with handmade toys, herding cattle, and doing what little boys like to do, and often working in the fields. See, life in the rural areas, through a combination of religion and traditional beliefs, often felt like you were acting out a movie script written by somebody else. There were many surprises. For example, when my cousin died of malaria, we were told that this was God's will. When the harvest was good, we looked up to the heavens to give thanks, and we were thankful for that. In this life that we had very little control over, fate and destiny were powerful, if not convenient, explanations for what happened to us. Life seemed to happen to us. Now, you fast forward 20 years from then. I'd finished my PhD at Cornell University in the US, and I went back to Zimbabwe for Christmas. The year was 2003. There's nothing like being in the rural areas for Christmas. Everybody comes back from the urban areas. People come from abroad, and the whole village feels like one happy family reunion. Lots of good food, meeting with long-time friends. So, in that particular year, after I finished our Christmas morning service at church, I decided to walk down to the local grocery store that also doubled as a village bar during the holiday seasons. By the time I got there was already a small crowd of mostly men drinking beer, dancing to loud music, and catching up on life. People who had not seen each other for a long time. So with my three brothers, we found a convenient corner in this smoke-filled room, and we got about the business of enjoying warm beer. So I'm sitting there in this corner where I see this older guy with a slightly worn clothes walking towards me, and he gets to me, and I very politely exchange holiday season greetings with him. Just before I turn over to talk to my brothers, the man taps me on my shoulder and says, "Ed, it's me, Thomas. You remember me?" Thomas? My childhood friend, Thomas? I tried very hard to cover the look of shock in my face. He looked much older, worn. So I invited him to sit down with me and enjoy a beer. We exchanged our secret childhood handshake, which I will not share with you because I swore to secrecy when I was 10 years old, and I mean to keep that. So we sat down and we got to catching up on this business that we call life. See, Thomas told me that life had not been too kind to him. He still lived in the nearby village. He had 5 children. He was farming a small piece of land, and every year he made just enough to get by. He had a few goats, and he was especially proud of his oldest daughter, Naomi, who was good at netball. He would not stop talking about her. See, in some ways, Thomas' life was very much like that of his parents and probably his grandparents before him. He was just making enough to get by. Every year, he was doing this something. As I went back to my parents' house that evening, I could not sleep. I was haunted by this question of, how did our lives turn out to be so different? I literally sat on the same bench with this guy, Thomas, and our lives now could not be any more different. Was this fate? Was this luck? Had I just been lucky and he has been unlucky? Was this all random with no rhyme or reason? Or maybe it was God's plan. That's what I thought. While God's plan seemed to fit me very well, it was a convenient explanation for my life, it sounded like a very unfair explanation for Thomas and his children. More importantly, as a development economist now, I could not just accept this as the answer. So I started to search to see if there was some common thread that would help me understand the lives of those classmates of mine who were still in the village versus those of us that had made it out. There must be some other causal relationship that must make sense. So I battled with this question for a while, and my eureka moment came when I, instead of looking at those who were in the village, I looked at those who had made it out, those who had been successful from my village. The answer emerged for me, it was very clear. All the success stories had had parents who had invested a little bit more money in their children's educations. Back in those days, my parents invested a little bit more money and sent all of us to missionary boarding schools that were nearby. These were slightly better than the village public schools that were under-resourced for secondary education. That may sound like a no-brainer. After all, we know the power of education. But as I dug a little bit deeper, I realized that these were also the best farmers in the village. These were farmers up to now that had wore terraced fields to prevent soil erosion. These were farmers who, instead of recycling seed from year to year, back in the days they were buying certified seed and they were getting higher yields from those varieties. These were farmers who, instead of working on those same old tired soils, were nourishing their soils with chemical fertilizers and manure every year. It looked like by moving from subsistence farming to making a little bit more about themselves, these farmers had been able to open new horizons for their children. They had been able to move from just producing enough to feed their families to producing just a little bit more. And with that extra that they produced, they sent it to the market, made a little bit of extra money. They came back to the village and invested this in their children's education and health. This, my friends, is how I actually made it out of the village. So I realized after this self-inspection that agriculture, to the millions of people around the world, is not just a way of livelihood. For millions of people who are living in rural areas out there, agriculture is often the only pathway out of poverty in rural areas. After that day, I dedicated my career to making sure that the millions of farmers out there get the most advanced agricultural technologies to help them meet their own needs. And one of those that is very passionate to me is improved seed varieties. I have tried very hard to make sure that all the farmers who grew up like me can have the best tools to help them fight food security. I know there's an element of luck, fate, and destiny in everybody's life. But I also know that there is a lot that we can do to improve the odds for the millions of farmers out there. It might be too late for my best friend, Thomas. But thanks to all of us here and all of our efforts, I believe it's not too late from his lovely daughter, Naomi. Thank you.